Hello and welcome everyone. Today I'm honored to host Dr. Gary Barker, a global leader for engaging men and boys for gender equality and social justice. Gary is the CEO and president and co-founder of Equimundo, and his work has transformed the way that we think about caregiving, men's roles in gender equality and women's rights, and also social justice. So today I'm very happy to have the opportunity to hear directly from Gary. His studies and his research and activism have shaped the global conversations in gender. So we will explore topics such as new masculinities, the role of men in gender justice, and the impact of global political shifts, and how can we build a more inclusive future together. So let's begin to our insightful discussion. Gary, welcome again. I'm so grateful to have you here in Istanbul in a snowy day.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited to have these conversations.
Thank you. So first, I would like to start with your personal journey, actually, and the mission of Equimundo. Can you tell us about yourself? How did it all start? We know that you're working on this issue for nearly 30 years. And how did it all start? How did your journey begin? And what was you working on before Equimundo? And also Equimundo is in a leading role now when we think of the organizations in the world. So you work with actually men and boys for gender equality. And in how many countries do you operate? Because we know you're making some research activities, surveys, and also campaigns for men and boys. So could you please elaborate your research initiatives and communication campaigns for us?
Sure. So yeah, I'll start with your question of how did I start in this work. I think back to when I was a teenager, when I was in secondary school, several things. One, many girls, many young women in school, all had a story of a boy or a man who treated them badly. From attempted sexual coercion to verbal abuse to some kind of harassment. Heard that frequently. I also witnessed a shooting in my secondary school. The stories we know that come out of the US in terms of young men's access to guns, lack of mental health support, believing that using guns is a way to resolve problems or get attention is something valid, and begin to question, why do we make men like this? My father, for his profession, was a social worker, which is a profession about the care of children, which is mostly a women's profession in the US and many parts of the world. And so I had at home a model of a caring man who made his cause and his daily work about the care of others and the care of children. So I think I had an early awareness of these ways that we make men and boys. There's challenges to them, and we need to figure out kind of how can we promote better ideas about manhood. I worked in Latin America for many years, particularly with survivors of violence, from the wars in Central America to gang violence in Colombia, and then I moved to Brazil to work with girls who were survivors of sexual exploitation. And in that work, there was a moment of thinking, we're supporting the girls who are the victims. What are we doing to engage the men who are victimizing these young women? What are we doing? Why aren't we asking them, what drives this? Why do some men think this is okay to pay for sex with girls under the age of 18? And I asked that question in a very insistent way to some partner organizations, some UN organizations, to say, we've got to talk about men. The problems that women and girls face, whether it's violence or harassment or inequality, or the lack of economic equality with men, are the problems of men. How can we step into that conversation and say men need to be part of this solution? Unfortunately, there were lots of women's rights advocates in Brazil and elsewhere who said, we need men in this conversation. So we're glad you're here. Now let's get to work. The organization that I co-founded in Brazil, we initially called Promundo, and we recently changed the US organization to Equimundo. And our work has always been about proving that men will buy into a healthier version of manhood if we present it to them in thoughtful, connected, caring ways. So we have carried out research, we do group education activities, we do community campaigns, we do international campaigns, we engage policymakers to try to promote changes in laws, to say we can engage men to embrace gender equality, to reduce violence, and to increase how much we as men participate in the care of others. All of this has a double objective, which is We want men to be allies for gender equality, so to improve the lives of women and girls. And we also believe that this improves the lives of men ourselves. So trying to present this in a different way. This is not against men. It's not saying we're doing this together so that men also see the benefits when we live gender equality.
Thank you. I hear from you that, first of all, you have a very strong role model.
Yes.
It started very early for you when you were a kid. And also I hear that you mean the harassment that the girls or the women were facing with, we call it like incel movement, right? The involuntary celibate, which is very also about incel on these days. So I hear such things from you. And Latin America, the survivors and the victims, and you were with them. It's really amazing. And so I'd like to ask you that, what was the is there any turning point for you? Is there any personal narrative that changed your life, opinions, thing in your life? Maybe one defining moment for your career, and you decided to do that rather than that.
Yeah, I mean there was many, right? I shared the one from my secondary school and witnessing that violence and the lack. So that was one moment of just the lack of space for boys who witnessed this violence and knew the boy who killed the other boy. There was a lack of space for us to talk about how we felt, the impact on us, the trauma on us that we felt witnessing this killing. So one was, why don't we allow men to talk about moments when we feel vulnerable, fear, feel deep sadness? So one was a conviction that we needed to create spaces where men can say, I'm not okay with this. I need help to talk this through. I need to connect with others rather than to sit behind this wall. Another moment I can share is my wife is Brazilian. Our daughter is from both countries, the US and Brazil. And I convinced my wife to accompany me to Chicago in the US, a very cold city. This is about the average weather, right, in the winter. So, and we were going to have a baby along the way. So the US offers no nationally guaranteed maternity leave or paternity leave. My wife at the time was the main breadwinner. It was her income while I was working on my doctorate degree. And she said, I have no paid leave. I have some sick leave that I can use, but I'm going to have to go back to work after 12 weeks. And so she said, well, who's going to take care of our baby? That would be me. So I had an amazing, overwhelming experience of being a stay-at-home dad. While she went off to work, we had a nanny helping some days in the week, and I did other days in the week. And this amazing experience of, I don't know if I know how to do this. I'm amazed at how little support there are for families with young children. I'm amazed that the pediatrician or the woman on the bus looked at me like, you don't know what you're doing here as a parent, do you? And I was trying to prove that I was a competent caregiver to my daughter. I can show you pictures of my daughter today. She's healthy and happy. She lived through this. I lived through this. But it was an amazing experience to say to bond, right? To be the one that she would call out for at night as well as her mother, obviously. But to feel that closeness. And also just to feel as well how little support we give to parents in general, but how much we think men are incompetent caregivers. And that we don't encourage men to do our role, and what we lose out as men when we don't have that close experience, close relationship with our child. That experience was where a lot of our work in our Men Care campaign comes from, of making it, supporting men to do our share of the care work.
You should tell them that you can do it.
Yes.
We always tell them you can't do it.
Right.
And you in your speech, you always emphasize that men are also, just like women, are born ready to caregiving, because biologically, we believe that they are not ready biologically, but it's not true. So in this session, I thought that we can talk about a little bit changes in gender equality and masculinity over time. Yeah. Because as you are working for 30 years with this issue, in which areas do you see that have men's roles and women's rights advanced? In which areas have they regressed? There's a backlash. And what are the biggest challenges that remain? Maybe you can tell us your, views about 30 years ago and now? Can you make a comparison for us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if we think 30 years ago, the Beijing 1995 Conference on the Rights of Women, that also included language about the need for men to be allies for this, right? The vast majority, if not every country in the world now has laws that make men's violence against women illegal. That is an advance. More governments take seriously women's voices when it comes to violence that they experience from male partners. We're by no means done. There's a huge amount of work to do there, but I think there's a greater awareness, international campaigns, national campaigns, a better array of services for women who survive violence, and more efforts to reach men with messages about it. And I think that there is some awareness. The rates of violence against women do not seem to have come down very much, if at all. So we know that we've advanced a bit, but we have a lot more to do in terms of engaging men on violence prevention. Women's participation in the workplace has increased, but it's stagnated. It's come up since 95 into the 2020s, but it has stagnated since and even gone a little bit backwards. COVID was a backward step for many countries in terms of women coming out of the workplace. We have some advances, important ones, I think, in men doing more of the hands-on care work. Women still do 3 times the amount on average, but we are seeing in some countries that men are slowly doing more. We have more women in political office. It's about 30% in congresses and parliaments across the world. It should be 50, and that also feels a bit stuck. And then we hit this Me Too moment 5 years ago, 6 years ago, depending on the country. And we're seeing a rising backlash. It's, in a way, the success of the feminist movement is leaving lots of men nervous. And I think we see a big pushback happening. We see it in data from young men, that they oppose women's rights or are going backwards compared to their father's generation, for example. We see it in some politicians who are pushing back on the progressive agenda and find that being anti-immigrant and anti-women's rights and homophobic all seem to go together. So some politicians are picking up on this confusion that some men face. So I think we are facing, in a way, the power of the women's rights movement is threatening. It's threatening to individual men, and it's threatening to a lot of male politicians, not the progressive ones who I think get it or are closer to getting it. But there's lots of men in positions of power who are threatened by the idea that you'll be held accountable if you mistreat a woman or if you don't believe in equality. We're scaring them. And I think we should, there's a part that we should celebrate, that this movement is scaring powerful men.
Yeah, we are scaring them more than ever, I think.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. So, we're going to talk about that deeply in the third part. So, you always mention about new masculinity concept and healthy masculinity. So, I'd like to ask you, what is the new masculinity and what does it mean in practice? And how can we foster a positive masculinity, healthy masculinity, and inclusive understanding of masculinity? And there's a growing concept of also toxic masculinity, as we know. So in media and politics, actually, as you mentioned. So do you think the conversation about this masculinity today is constructive? Or do we need another narrative now?
Yeah, I mean, part of the masculinity, these ideas about manhood, right? What we learn as boys, how the world expects men to behave, is always changing. It's always in flux. And it's always been varied. In any moment in time, if I look at U.S. history, right, we had many men for whom it was natural that women did not work in the workplace. They were not in politics. We didn't allow them to vote until the 1920s. But you had Frederick Douglass, one of the African-American former slave who led part of the abolition movement to end slavery in the U.S. He was an outspoken feminist. He didn't call it feminism, but he believed, when slaves are freed, we also needed women to be freed to be able to vote and be wherever they wanted in the world. That was the 1860s in the US. We can look in Europe as well. Many, and elsewhere in the world, there have always been men who believe in gender equality. They've often been ridiculed. And the first men who supported women's voting in many countries were often ridiculed by other men. But I think it's important just to note there's always been men who believe that caring for children is a human thing. They don't lose their manhood if they show tenderness to a child, that they don't use violence against women and think it's abhorrent. We've had those men throughout history, even before we had laws that said men couldn't use violence against their wives or a female partner. We know, I mean, there's been a huge shift. If historically my identity as a man was, I'm a provider, right? I work, I can support a family, therefore I can have children, I get recognized as an adult man in society. What happens when women can work and when they don't need men to be complete? Women don't need us for the income. And now we have many, many ways that women can have children without men being physically with them. So many men are adapting to that, and maybe we call that the new masculinity, that men who are comfortable with gender equality believe it, live it, support it, and men who are opposing it. But none of us are kind of that black and white. So I think it's important, this conversation about toxic masculinity. On the one hand, it's been useful because we can identify these are ideas about manhood that we think cause harm. And I think it's useful to have that language sometimes. Most of the time, that language to men feels accusatory. It feels like I'm saying, you're a man, so you're poisonous. Because toxic is a very harsh word. It rolls off the tongue like, it's poison, right? So none of us want to feel like we're poisonous individuals. So I think if you want to have a conversation with men about I don't want to arrive at men and say, I'm going to teach you how to be a good man. I think the conversation is, what do you think it means to be a good man to you? Most of the time, that conversation is going to be about supporting my family, wanting to see my children do the best in the world that they can, treating others well. So I think most men kind of in our hearts, know what good manhood looks like. I don't think we have to teach it. I think what we have to do is sort of separate out like all the messages you hear that say, don't show vulnerability. Violence is an okay thing to do. Look, the guy who's violent gets ahead. You should have all the sexual partners you want. Don't worry about others around you. It's fine if you harass. Nobody's going to hold you accountable. That's expected. We've got to pull that stuff away. Because I think there's lots of good men wanting to show their better selves. So I think that makes the question different than saying you're a man who brings harm, to say, I see the good in you, let's have a conversation.
That's a very nice point of view. Thank you. And also you make so many research in so many 50 countries like that. And I think every year you make another research like, I'd like to mention them as well. The Manosphere Rewired and State of American Men, the Membox, the State of the World's Fathers, the State of UK Boys, like that. So I guess you see all kind of men and boys in this research. So do you have any striking and shocking results that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, a few key points that, what these studies are about is trying to say, what is up with men? How are men reacting to to the cause of gender equality? How are they reacting to war and conflict? How are they reacting to the new social media where we spend lots of time? How are they reacting to COVID? How are they reacting to women in the workplace? So they've all had different stories. I think a few key points to us are in the issue of violence and men's use of violence against women. It's been important to affirm that probably the single largest individual driver of men's use of violence against a female partner or their wives is the violence they witnessed or experienced growing up. Why is that powerful? And our study is not the only one that shows that, but it does tell us it's not just about putting a campaign about prevention. It's about understanding that violence pays ahead. Violence leads to more violence. That's fairly obvious. But then it says, if I want to prevent men's use of violence against women, I have to listen to and understand the violence that men themselves experience. So it means our prevention has to have a trauma aspect to it. It has to be about, I know you experience some pain. I want to help you about that while I call you out if you cause harm or pain to others. So it gives us a strong tool in terms of prevention work. I think the other that we see is that if violence pays forward, the other key finding and also a bit obvious is that caregiving and caring manhood pays forward. The men who do more hands-on care in their own households as adults are more likely to report that their fathers or another man in their household did it. Kind of obvious. If I witness men in my household showing that we care for the household too, I'm more likely to do it. So essentially as men, as we do more of this at home, we're paying that forward in next generations. The other finding is that women who are working outside the home, women who believe they are equals in the world, they're also more likely to have a father or a man in the household who showed equitable decision making and participated in care work. So all of it tells us that one of the solutions for gender equality is men's care of others in the home sets in motion the kind of, the pathway to gender equality that we're trying to get to.
Yeah, that's why you focus on fatherhood mostly. Yeah. It's so important. And I hear from you that the victims are not only the women, also men are this system, this patriarchal system. They also suffer from this system because they need also help. So how about the man's role in gender equality, and what kind of an institutional change do we need? So when you talk to men and boys, what do you advise them to make, especially those in the top levels of the corporations, the companies? How do you engage them to this gender equality issue? Because it's a question also for me, myself, because I'm also working with the influential men in Turkey. So how do you engage them? How do you convince them? And what's your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, and you touched on this in your comment before. I mean, one is to get men, I think in the cause of gender equality, it's been easy for men to say, well, it's about women, and I'm going to stand here on the side and not do harm, so that simply not doing harm is good enough. And I think many men are frightened with, well, what else can I do, right? If I do anything more, I might get it wrong. I'm not sure what I should say. I think that there's two things that seem to work well, whether we're working with a head of a corporation or a young man in secondary school, is a conversation about how is manhood going for you? How is this version of manhood that you've been raised in, that you see around you, how is that going for you? One of the studies that we worked on, the Man Box that you mentioned before, and we've carried this out in more than 50 countries, the more that a man believes in a restrictive kind of traditional view of manhood, that men are in charge, women are responsible for the caregiving, that men have the right to the sex when they want it, that violence is an okay thing to get what you want, that a man doesn't ask for help. Men who believe in that cluster of ideas, they're more likely to cause harm to women. They're also more likely to think about suicide, to be depressed, to drink too much, to cause harm to themselves.
And die earlier.
And die early.
Yeah.
Yep. So part of that is to get men to go, oh, wait, as you said earlier, that men also experience this thing we call patriarchy. These ideas about manhood cause us harm as men. And I think that's a useful kind of moment of being aware of, wait, I'm in this world that teaches me these versions of manhood that cause me harm. And then the next step is, how do you think that applies to women? So it's a bit like, when we get on the plane, first they say, put on, if there's the loss of oxygen and the mask falls, adjust your own mask. So part one is to go, oh yeah, this manhood, it's got some stuff that's not working. And then put on, help the person next to you. So the next step is to say, how do you think it's going for women? Have you thought about what it's like for a woman to face the discrimination at the workplace? She's offered a brilliant idea, but your voice sounds deeper. You sound more serious. The world takes you serious as a man. And your idea may be the inferior one, but hers is going to get listened to because she's a woman. How do you think that feels? So then we get men to think about how it is for women and girls, non-binary individuals, gay individuals, to think, how is this going for others? And then the third part is, what can you do? So I think that's the next step that we need to bring men into.
Yeah, not doing harm is not good enough.
It's not good enough.
It's very nice. It's very nice. Thank you.
It's a good thing. It's a good start.
Yeah, it's a good start. And what can you do? Yeah. So you also emphasize not only the individual efforts, but also institutional efforts, like developing some policies about gender equality. So what are the key policy levels from your perspective? What do we need in our corporations, in our institutions to have the real progress on this issue?
I mean, it's been a starting point for lots of corporations that have taken this seriously is, first just a deep look at how are gender inequalities playing out in our workplace. Salary divide, who's in the top positions, what is your board composition, what is the composition from the lower paid jobs all the way up, where do you have gaps in gender equality, where do you have gaps in recruitment, where do you have gaps in retention. So what's the gender story of your corporation? And then I think it's about setting goals to say, if we're 37% women, we think our corporation should be half and half. What strategies do you need in place, and are you measuring them? There will be some men who are ready to go with that, and there will be some men who are fearful of that, thinking, I'm going to lose out here. I think we do have to say to men, there are some things that do require you to give up privilege. If you have a board of directors that's 90% men, some men are going to have to step off or not have their terms renewed so that you can achieve equality there. So I think we have to be clear about communicating that and clear to men about this is why we're doing it. This is what we're doing. This is how long it will take. And when we hit this metric, we may, this is the metric that we're trying to hit. I think the other part is, so one, I think is to have in place, we've looked internally, these are the measures that we have. And then to figure out, these are the indicators. This is where we want to be. What next do we need to do? Is it about recruitment? Often the excuse will be, well, we don't get enough women coming into this space. So then it's to say, well, if you're a big enough corporation, can you contribute to the supply chain of women coming up in this field? Women engineers, can you fund university recruitment efforts to bring women into engineering programs? And if you have to start earlier, start in high school, start in secondary school. So how to get corporations to see it, I'm also responsible for that. So yeah, looking at kind of what is the supply chain that comes on up. Third, I would put care policies and caregiving. Probably the biggest driver of the gap in wage differentials between men and women. We think 65% of that gap is caused by caregiving duties. That women step out of the workplace to care for children, and when they step back, their partners continue to climb. They're starting way down here. So we know the only way to achieve equality there is to insist that men take parental leave, that men are co-caregivers, and that we also need daycare, we need childcare, and we need flexible work when that's possible, depending on the profession. So care policies that, let's use the right word here, let's say that insist, that demand that men do our share of the care work, and that the workplace is friendly and supportive to every caregiver, not only families with young children, but those who have elderly parents that they're caring for. Fourth, I would put, the workplace has to be safe, and safe in the broadest sense. One, it's got to be safe from harassment. So I think that we need clear policies in place that say these kinds of behaviors are not accepted. Here's how if you experience this, we want you to report, and here's how we deal with that when it happens. And it can't just be you bring the lawyers in to sign a non-disclosure agreement and you don't talk about it anymore. It's got to be clear to see what happens. Other staff are watching. They need to know what the process was, what the conclusion was, and what the action was. It takes brave companies to do that, but I think some are doing it. But it also needs to be psychologically safe. Do I feel safe at the workplace in terms of how we interact with each other? If I have a disability, a mental health issue, a hearing deficiency, if I have a mental health issue that requires special needs, am I seen and respected for those issues, or am I put to the side? Do we have this hyper-competitive environment where everyone feels unsure? Or do we feel supported even as we're held accountable for doing our jobs? Yeah. So those would be my top, is that 4 or 5? 5?
5, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very nice recipe. Thank you so much. So when I was listening to you, Gary, I thought that we have so many biases, right? Also, you mentioned about a concept like, I liked it so much, daddy bonus, because, for example, we always talk about the flexible hours, flexible times for only women, but not for men. Yeah. So men are as you told me, providers, and they are the breadwinners. They are the ultimate breadwinners, and women can take flexible times or they can work part-time, and so they will win less and their wages are less. So it's such a natural thing for us. So we don't question it. But you also mentioned in your speech, like we should also give a space for men for taking care of their home, their pet, their children, their older ones, and enabled ones. And and ourselves for our mindfulness and our health and mental health, like that. You're so right. So maybe maybe you can tell about this daddy bonus thing, because if a woman give birth and have children, then it's like that. Her career path is like that. But if a man have children and the career path is like that, maybe you can. Yeah, sure. I didn't come up with that expression. Feminist economists came up with that expression a long time ago. But when men
when men have children, our income goes up. Even if we're not doing a better job at work. I mean, we just, does it mean because we're perceived as more serious, as more professional? Does it mean other men think, oh, he's got more economic pressures at home, so I better give him a raise? We're not really sure all the reasons that it happens. The gap increases, we know, because women step out of the workplace often, whether for paid leave or unpaid leave. And that time that they're out of the workplace, their income, right, then it depends on how many years later or months later they return to the workplace. So yeah, men seem to get this kind of unmerited bonus just by becoming fathers. So I think I like that the Norwegians have turned that around, and in creating their paternity leave policy to encourage men to take paid leave, they have a number of days designated that can't be transferred from the mother to the father. So they call those the daddy bonus days. Fathers can take them, but they can't be transferred. So they're kind of flipping around. To decrease the unmerited daddy bonus, they're offering a daddy bonus of paid leave days to incentivize men to spend time with their children. And if we take equal number of days off of work and we do this in a more equitable way, the wage gap between women and men reduces. No country has achieved full equality, but the countries that offer more paid leave for fathers and where fathers use the paid leave, the wage gap is less. So it works, but we're not there yet. Yeah.
And for caregiving at home, you mentioned that there's a gap between women and men at 2.5 hours, which is good news for you because it's too easy to fill the gap, bridge them. Can you tell me about this?
Sure. Yeah, if we look at middle-income countries, the gap in how much time women spend on average at home caring for children, again, this is mostly middle to upper-income countries, it's about 2 hours, over 2 hours. So that's not a huge amount of time if we think, and we'll sometimes, joke with men to say, if you watched 1 hour less of a football match, or streamed one fewer show, and your partner, your wife, did one less hour of work, so she could do whatever she wants to do with her free time, or work outside the home, whatever she wants to do. The gap, it's reducible. That's solvable, right? It's an amount of time that's not crazy. Now, the other issue is none of us are average, so the average is, it applies to, but it does suggest, if we look internally at how are we doing with that, the amount of the gaps don't have to seem so huge. And I think we often get stuck that, it feels so structural and impossible to change. We need the policies to do it. I think it's not just men saying, I want to do more of the time. We know that if you're a low-income man and you've got to work 14 hours per day for your family, you're doing a kind of caregiving, right? To expect that you're going to come home after 14 hours of work and 2 hours of transportation there and back, like how much energy does anyone have to do more caregiving, man or woman? Yeah. So I think it's not simply, to expect that every household can just go, oh yeah, it's up to me. If I stop watching a football match, I'll do more care work. It's more complex than that, but I think it is useful for us just to think we should be able to figure out the policies, the workplace support that we need, and then the individual couple family figuring this out. It's not that big of a gap, but it's still a challenging gap.
Yeah, right. Individual effort is so important. So let's talk about a little bit the political shifts around the world and the role of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as we know, Trump's administration just has targeted I can tell it openly because he declared in his speech that they are eliminating them from federal institutions and also the military. And it's useless. These day efforts are useless. So we know that the men from various backgrounds also played a role in Trump's election and supports these policies, and also some women as well. So how do you interpret this trend? Because it's not a trend just only for US, but for so many countries, we see a more conservative, more autocratic and right-wing concept that their efforts are useless and human rights are useless. So what risk do you see in this shift?
Yeah, I mean, the core of DEI is essentially gender equality. It has other things as well, diversity based on disabilities, sexual orientation, other factors as well, ethnicity. But a huge portion of it is we want to make workplaces safe and equitable for women and girls and for others. So I think it feels, and if you ask most people in those words, do you think women should have an equal possibility to succeed in the workplace? Majority of men in the majority of the world will say yes. Now, if we step into a moment where we perceive scarcity, there's not enough jobs to go around. Some people are getting them. The economy feels uncertain, which is what many of us face a lot of the time. Then the question becomes different, or then the response becomes different. If you ask, and the World Values Survey, and we ask this question as well, if times are tough, whose job is more important, the man or the woman? The vast majority, even of very progressive women and men, say the man's income is more important, right? As an issue of economic survival. So when we feel, again, this moment of scarcity and economic insecurity, it's easy to push back and say, I don't want to bother with DEI. I just want to get that job because I'm worried about my family. So it's not all based in kind of harm. Some of it is just what happens when we get really economically stressed. And we've seen that in our data as well. Men who feel a sense of economic stress and uncertainty are more likely to oppose gender equality. Now, right-wing politicians in many countries have figured out they can step into an angry man populism, and they can draw men to vote for them if they say, look, DEI and all these equity programs are against you. They don't like you. They think you're bad. They think you're the problem. That's not true. That is not what DEI policies are about, but it plays into a narrative that men are losing out when women win. Actually, what we know from whether at home or at the workplace, when we achieve closer to equality, we're all happier, women and men. Workplaces do better. They're safer for men too. When harassment is called out, men actually don't feel bullied as well by some men at the workplace, or women sometimes. So it's a, let's just call it that. It's a lie that DEI is somehow against men. There are moments, of course, where along the way some accusations are made that are exaggerated or need to be questioned more. Yes, but on the whole, this movement is about saying the workplace should be equal for women and others. Get over it, men. And your life gets better too. You like these workplaces better as well. I think we've got a huge challenge now, which is as some men began to get called out for causing harm, a lot of men thought, oh, it's going to come to me. I'm going to get called out. This is going to happen to me as well. And there are moments of excess, right? Where I think we need to give each other a bit more space of going, hey, that was a small mistake. Let's take it as a small response. Let's not make everything equal, right? Where a sexual assault is not the same as a harmful word that came out in an angry moment. We have to be able to acknowledge the differences of harm caused and figure out appropriate responses. But for the most part, the world gets better when men are called out, or women, for causing harm. So that DEI also has that aspect of it, that we hold each other accountable when we cause harm at the workplace or elsewhere. That threatens a lot of men, because for years you could do that and other men would laugh, or they would ignore it, or they'd look away, and suddenly you're being held accountable if you caused harm. So how do we step into this moment? I think one is we've got to say it is not so obvious for many men the need to do this, and we need to step in with a bit of compassion and a bit of grace of going, all right, guys, this is not against you. Let's talk about how you are also part of this conversation. We don't assume that every man is going to cause harm. And I think this also requires women looking at men at the workplace and saying, that men can come with good, and men can also be the victims of harm at times from other men, sometimes from women. So we need to look at it from a more complex perspective, I think, from women's side as well, but also to step into, we've got to fight for the gains that were made in the women's rights space. They're being pushed back in so many places, and I think this fight back needs men to stand up as well. I want to see men standing up to Trump's ending of DEI, and lots of men are. Members of our Senate, activists, we are writing about this. Mm-hmm. Other men that we know are speaking out about it, some celebrities as well. We need some men who are conservative, but also believe in the basic decency of women to also join us. And they exist. I think at the moment they're being frightened into following along the strong men.
Yeah, you mentioned the one that are frightened, but also you have some allies, men allies that who are very brave as well. So I'd like to mention to our friends that in 2016, when Trump was first elected, you and other male allies in gender activism published an advertisement, and its heading was "Prove It, President Trump." So you addressed him directly and asked a very simple question, actually. It was very natural for me and it was very good. The text was also very good and very strict. You asked to him that why shouldn't we be worried and how will you support women? Because you already told that you will support women, but please show us. And it was very, I think, creative and challenging. So how was this letter received by Trump and his supporters at that time? I wondered.
Through the news, do they, through the noise of it all, do they even read it? Is a big question. But I think that's, we don't know when an article gets attention, right? When it gets read, when it gets pushed back on. We had Governor Newsom from California, who's been an important progressive ally on these causes. He signed on to it, probably the most prominent who signed on with it. I think we've got to say it even more, even louder now. And maybe, you're giving me the idea that maybe we should do it right now as well. We did it in 2016, if folks remember, because he was caught on tape where he bragged about grabbing women in their genitalia without their permission and said he could get away with it because he was a powerful man. And he said, then when he was called out on that, he said, don't listen to that. I treat women better than anybody. And we're so used to just this exaggerated language that particularly the men around Trump, or the women as well who enable him, don't call out, don't say, it just gets pushed away. And I think, we have to ask at the moment, maybe we should remind him again. Remember in 2016, you said no one treats women better than you. How's that going when you just ended gender equality as a policy across the US federal government? How is that better for women? You've given me an idea. Maybe we need to put that piece out there and see if we could get even more men to sign on. Thank you. I'm taking this idea.
More men going to tell you.
I think, and I wonder if we could get some conservative men who also care about women in their lives to join us.
Yeah, they will join you.
And if they won't, their silence tells a huge amount about them.
Yeah, that would be perfect. So
thank you for that idea.
Thank you. So also you wrote an article 2 days ago, which I read, and you also tell all these things. I think you wrote about not only Trump but leadership style. It was you were telling that some autocratic leaders, there exist some autocratic leaders and some yes men around them. And it is so important. It's a very nice article. I mean, maybe you can tell something about that.
The main part we're calling out is, Trump's bullying behavior is fairly obvious, right? We all know what a bully. The vast majority have experienced bullying, men or women, non-binary individuals, everyone. The part that we often forget about is all the people behind him, and in the case of the inauguration in the US, all the tech guys, all men, essentially standing there saying, we agree with it. Some of them have come out directly, right, between Musk and Zuckerberg, basically saying, we're on side. We're on side with him of ending DI. It's causing harm. It's gone too far. We've got to say, we are the people who make their wealth possible. We are on X. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram and all the rest that these guys are making their billions off of. What can we do to show it's not okay for me as somebody who, because my data is your profit, what can we do that says, I'm out of here, or I'm protesting, or I'm using your own platform to push it back on you? Like, why don't they feel a sense of shame? So that's a collective, accusation on those of us who are just staying quiet about this, because we love the platform, because it's too hard to change, because that's how we communicate now. We've got to figure out some creative way that we as the customers who have the power, we've got the power, if we come together, not two of us can't do it, but what could we do to say, guys, this is not okay? And I'm using the word guys deliberately. They're all men who are billionaires, who have a huge amount of power and are giving their voice of basically saying, we are fine with the harassment. Trump's been found liable for sexual assault. We are standing behind a man who's been found responsible for an insurrection, responsible for sexual assault, and just ended gender equality in our country. You're okay with that. How is that going for you?
And why now? You know, why are you pushing back right now? The backlash from DEI activities right now, as you told me, they are scaring.
They're scared. Yeah.
The tech man, the yes man.
We've not been good, and I think we on the progressive side who believe in women's rights, I think we also have to look at ourselves as well of, have we been talking to men in ways that felt inviting, or have men felt basically accused? Have we acknowledged, we use the word a lot in English, accountability, right? To hold someone accountable for harms they do, which sometimes feels to a lot of men like, I'm waiting for you to mess up and then I'm going to call you out, right? That's not a comfortable space for most men and most humans, right? So I think we also have to look on how have we on the progressive side sought to bring men into the conversation, or have we just thought that were all the problems? So I think we've got to do better as a progressive field, and I think we do, and that's why I don't think women have to get better at that. You have experienced the harms that men carry out. I think we as men have to step in as allies, not stepping over the women who lead this work, but to say, men, there's a place for us here. There's work that we need to do. Stay calm about feeling like you're being accused. Let's step into these challenging conversations. And I think we need women to show a bit of, to understand the nuance of men's complex relationship with power, with men's complex relationship with this thing that we call manhood or patriarchy. So we have some work to do as well.
Yeah. As you tell that, not over, not backwards, but side by side, like the name of our organization. Side by side. So when we talk about the political shifts and the governments, it's not possible not to mention Project 2025. So it's a product of the Heritage Foundation, and Heritage Foundation is one of the Washington's most prominent right-wing think tanks. So first produced, I guess, the policy plans for future Republican administration in 1981. So when Ronald Reagan was about to take office, so now they are producing similar documents in connection with the presidential elections. So including 2016, I guess, when Trump was first elected. So what do you think about this Project 2025? Efforts and documents.
Yeah, I mean, it is, for those who believe in a state that should provide, a government that should provide good for people, that should work toward reducing inequalities of all kinds, income, racial, gender-based, that should be a force for good, not a force for harm, who believe in women's right to choose what to do with their body, who believe in the rights of LGBTI individuals. It's a frightening and horrifying document. It wants to take us back to a version of our Constitution was originally for white men who owned property. Voting and rights and all the things that are enshrined were mainly thought of as for white men with property. So it feels like a version that says, yep, forget the 100+ years of making the promise of rights for all closer to a reality. Forget that. Let's go backwards, right? It's got a religious fundamentalism to it, but it's got a political fundamentalism to it that's quite frightening. Frightening this time because we had access to it a year and a half ago. Some of us were reading sections of it, whatever the number of pages, but it's well over 500. It's massive with all of its annexes, etc. It was detailed, and it's all happening right now. Trump, of course, on the campaign trail said, during the campaign, he said, no, I didn't do that. That's not my campaign. He's like following each chapter. I mean, they're choosing which one looks strategic now, right? So our foreign assistance has essentially been frozen. It's more than $70 billion a year that go to international aid, mostly to lower income countries, but it's refugee support and HIV, it's public health services around the world. Not always implemented as well as it could, but it's not to throw it out like that. Frozen, right? Put all the staff on administrative leave, except for a handful of so-called essential personnel. That's in Project 2025. All the movement to restrict women's rights to abortion, that's also in there. Getting rid of DEI, calling DEI harmful, that's language that they're taking straight from there. The sad part is, or the frightening part is, if in 2016, I don't think anyone thought Trump was going to win, so they didn't have all this information at hand. They were not really ready. This time they were ready. And we see it every single day. I mean, they've done more harm in 10 days than most presidents have been able to do in 4 years.
He feels more powerful, I guess. Yeah.
He won the election. I mean, that's the part that we have to say. We did not get the vote out. For all the strange things about the US elections, he won the popular vote and the Electoral College. So we can't say there was a stolen election. We don't do like he did and claim a stolen election when there was none. Yeah.
And there's a conflict there, the leaders like Trump claims that, no, I'm doing the most favors to women because, in my board, in my team, there are so many strong women right there.
Yeah.
So
when you were talking here? Yeah.
So, there's a conflict as well. So, do you see a way forward when we think about this conservative trends, the shift, the politics? We see it everywhere in the world, but maybe we can also talk about this. There's something like that. We know it and we can not run out of it. But what strategies might work to bridge this divide gap?
Yeah. How do we step into it?
Yeah.
The way people vote often for a strong autocrat or perceived as strong autocratic leader often goes against what they actually want. So I think we've got to do some really clever information presentation, which is, so let's look at childcare. Okay, so we did a survey with partners in the US 6 months back, a year back. And what did we see? Republican fathers want childcare, want paid leave for dads, want support to low-income families, virtually the same rate that Democratic voting women of color. Because we all need this to get by. We need cheaper childcare. We need to be able to afford childcare if we have kids so that we can work outside the home. We want the leave so we can take care of our children. Republicans love their children too. They like to take care of them and be close to them. So I think that's one area, is to say, look at the themes. Abortion rights. The majority of folks in the US and many other countries as well prove it. They are for women having the right to choose. And take other topics. Most people in the US think that vaccinations are actually effective. They're scientifically proven. But the noise that can be made on the right because of the uncertainty. So I think part of what we have to do is we have to get better about getting out of kind of narrow identity politics and more into lots of folks are suffering. We need job creation that thinks about women, but also thinks about that low-income white guy in the middle of the country who lost his job because some corporation moved to another country or whatever. He is also vulnerable. And it's not enough to say, well, men have always been on top, so we don't have to care about him. That's not good enough. We can care about gender equality and care about economic equality at the same time. So I think we've got to get our messaging much better. We've also got to figure out there's a huge emotional factor that fear brings. Trump and choose your autocratic leader, they play into fear, right? The world's going to fall into chaos. You've got to look out for yourself. Don't worry about the world being just worry about, you getting ahead. We've got to somehow create community, right? So that folks feel like I can put my fear down. We're in it together, right? And so we do have to figure out, how do we create a sense of unity that I think is being dissolved, partly because of the worlds we live online, partly because right-wing politicians are really good at convincing us to be against each other. And that's really tough for a progressive to say, I need to be nice to somebody on the other end of the political spectrum. But we've got to figure out a way that we build community, which is why I think we see at local levels where people have a greater sense that I know you because you're my neighbor. I know you because your children go to the same school that mine do. Even if we don't vote the same, it's hard for me to hate you because you live right next to me, right? So I don't know how we get that to a national level somehow.
Maybe we can use this sense, yes, and putting the social justice in the, Thank you, Gary. So the last session, I'd like to talk about Turkey and US a little bit. You have been working with Turkey for nearly 20 years, Akçalı, you're working with Akçalı. And in your experience, what are the common things that you see in US life and in Turkey? Because you are living in Washington D.C., but you've made so many projects with. Yeah. So, do you think is there anything that Turkey is ahead of US in terms of something?
I mean, I don't know if I know all the intricacies of your national services, but we've been inspired by Akçalı's work in terms of its scale, right, of focusing on childcare, support for mothers and children across the country, and that they started a fatherhood training program. Before we now partner in about 30 countries in doing father training together with mothers. It's not, we don't assume moms know it all and have everything they need, but the need to make visible fathers' participation in childcare, to provide dads with some basic skills in how to be a hands-on father. So we've learned a lot from Akçalı, and it's probably one of the biggest father training programs in the world that they carry out. So we've been part of inviting them to share with programs from other countries. In Brazil, we helped get started a national program that's part of the Ministry of Health. In Rwanda, we've helped start a father training program that's becoming nationwide as well with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Gender. And we've promoted some exchanges between Akçalı and those programs to say there's a huge amount to learn from there. The scale of it, by being a big country, and Akçalı has an impressive reach. I think thinking beyond just like a single project, how can we take this to scale? The corporate sector collaboration that Akçalı represents, right, of a private family with, kind of recognizing their need to invest in this, I think is important as well. So yeah, I think that's a topic I can bring up there is much to learn from.
Nice to hear that in terms of, when you think the civil society sector in Turkey, I'm so happy to hear such good practices. And also, let me add something. To my opinion, in Turkey, for caring thing, we have our grandmas and grandfathers. So it's also very important for women when they want to turn back to their work.
They
extended
can find families very important.
Family members.
Yeah.
I think the ratio is better than US.
Yeah, I think it is too, because often you're living closer.
You're living closer.
We move around a huge amount. So the importance of extended family.
Big advantage for us.
I absolutely
agree.
Also,
you are working with Akçalı in Man Care campaign, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the Man Care campaign that you mentioned.
So this campaign we started in 2011 with a number of partner organizations. Akçalı joined us shortly after that. To say there's now more than 60 countries that are part of it, I think it's 65 perhaps, where there's NGO or civil society partners who are doing campaigns, advocacy work to extend parental leave or paternity leave specifically, to look at your public services and see where can we incentivize men to participate more in the care of children, advocating with workplaces to provide, to call attention to engaging men. I would say the media is another space. How can we, I know, Turkey exports a huge amount of soap operas. My other home country of Brazil does that too. How can we influence the folks who tell those stories? Because they often repeat the same gender stereotypes, right? How can we tell some stories, particularly because we know our media is exported to other countries that show men caring for children, men standing up when they say violence against women. I think there's a power there that could be used as well.
Yeah, in recent years, they started to use this man care thing in commercials as well. And it's news. Yeah, it's very good. So the last questions, I guess. Yeah. So we talked about actually the authoritarianism and the autocratic leaders. So, they always harm gender equality at first stage, and women's rights and women's body actually. So, and we are, as the people of NGOs and civil society sector and activists, we always live this thing in so many countries, not only in US or Turkey or anywhere where we go. So sometimes we face these things not in our country managements, but not only in governments, but in local governments or in our corporations, in our institutions. So what lessons can activists tell and learn from each other, to your opinion? Because I think we live the similar things, apart from the culture and the geography. So in this kind of difficult political climate, how can we survive? How can we, sustain the solidarity? And how can we learn from each other. For example, there's an umbrella organization that you are one of the co-founders, Men Engage, and yanındayız this year have been a member of that. Yeah. I think it's so useful because it collects 700 NGOs under the umbrella, and we share our expertise, and it's so useful. Yeah. So I would like to take your opinion about that. How can the activists can support each other?
I mean, one you just said, which is to acknowledge there's a lot of us, both a lot of civil society organizations, but also lots of individual men and women who believe in and support gender equality. It is frightening in certain political moments and historical moments to speak out about it. I was just in the Czech Republic with their Czech Senate. They were commemorating the day of a women's rights activist from the 1940s who lost her life for speaking out about democracy because she was killed by the Gestapo under Hitler's reign. I know women in Mireille Franco in Brazil, a colleague of some of our colleagues who was killed for speaking out against Bolsonaro's government. We know that women lose their lives in this work. So one is we have to be witness to harm that happens. I think the other is, and speak up. I think in these really, really challenging moments, it becomes even more necessary that we're brave enough to speak out and that we know, there's risk. We're around you. And I think we have to, make sure that those of us who do speak out, that we support those who speak out. We've got you. We're watching. We can't guarantee your safety, but we guarantee that what happens is seen. So that to me is so crucial. It is, most of the time, it's not so dramatic what happens to us when we speak out, but it's still fearful. And what I see a lot of is self-censorship, where we start to stay quiet even before they tell us to shut up. So I think it's really key right now that we keep speaking. And the other is I just find inspiration from folks like Tarana Burke, who I had the chance to meet, who said, I didn't expect I'd have much impact in this topic in my lifetime. This is decades, this is lifetimes of work to achieve the equality we're after. So I guess when I think we're trying to do a work plan that we're going to achieve this in 2 years, and to think, it might be 20, maybe it will be 2, and let's try. But how to have just the sense that I'm part of a process, I'm one of many voices, the cause will carry on.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, we have to be brave enough to speak out all together. And it was very eye-opening for me. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to Istanbul for us. All
Thanks
the way
for your
from
work.
DC.
Yeah, I know it's not easy here either.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your inspiring speech all the time, not just today. And so I'm so excited for tonight as well. Yeah. So also thank you for your all efforts, your commitments, your dedication to gender equality and human rights, and engaging men and boys to gender equality. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you for all your energy and life force that you put in this too.
Thank you. Yeah.